Morning comes without a bell. Only the scrape of frost along the rushes and the slow breath of the fen as if the earth itself were winded. Smoke hangs low, unsure it wants to rise. Someone has found a body in the peat. No one speaks the name yet, because names weigh more than hunger. In the hush you can hear the arithmetic of winter. How many mouths, how many sacks, how many nights until the moon goes new again, and the wolves pace the rim of thought. A sparrow scolds the cold. Somewhere a child coughs. The mill's wheel turns grudgingly as if Osric himself must beg it, and the creek replies with iron in its throat. If there is mercy, it hides in small things. A dry twig, a slice of light, a steady hand. Then an arrow lands in Ada's yard and quivers in the frozen mud, wrapped with a strip of seal skin like a promise you never wanted, and the day tightens, ready to snap. Word spreads the way fear prefers. Quietly, wrong, first, then loud. Tribute or fire? Say the men at the bridge, tribute and fire. Say the women who remember better. Edric measures the palisade with a soldier's patience while Ida counts fevers, and both arrive at the same sum, too little time. Cuthred opens his book of remedies and finds a map hidden between lines, where willow bark is a road and water is a wall if you teach it. The village argues in murmurs that cut deeper than shouts. Osric keeps his smile tidy as a latch, speaks of order while his eyes tally sacks. Wolfwyn learns where grown voices fracture. She fits herself into the breaks like a wedge. At dusk, Ada ties the arrow above her hearth to remind the night it was seen. The marsh breathes again, and the cold begins to show its teeth. Night thickens until the huts seem carved from a single block of dark. Wind ferries salt from the unseen sea, and with it, the memory of ships like teeth. Ada moves door to door, the way a bell would if Fenwick had one. She leaves a sip of warmth, a word, a stitch of willow to bind coughs to the past. Cuthred sits with his manuscripts as if they were frightened animals, coaxing them into baskets. Edric sleeps in mail, which is not sleep at all but a pact with waking. Osric dreams of measuring grain with his thumbs on the scale. Wolfwyn lies awake under the rafters and counts backward from the number of stars she can see through a knothole. Somewhere in the reed black, a footstep pauses, and the dark listens to itself. No alarm is raised. Instead, a whisper. Keep breathing, keep still. Keep your edges small. Dawn chips at the horizon with a dull knife. Inga waits by the reed bed where the creek fattens into marsh, a white rag tied to her bow, a truce cut from a torn sail. Ada goes alone because someone must. Because the village can spare a heartbeat but not two. They talk like people who both owe the tide. Names of men who command other men, not the air. Prices, oaths, distances by oar. Inga's words walk a narrow plank between warning and duty, and Ida hears the sea in them. What it gives, it takes again. They part without touching, which feels more honest than swearing. When Ida returns, Edric is waiting with questions that are really choices. Cuthred lays a finger on a map of water and says the word canal as if it were prayer. The sky keeps its counsel, the wind does not. By midday, the rumor has a spine, tributing grain and youth, said to be counted by men who count in scars. Edric drills the able with sticks and old curses. He knows how quickly courage runs when the first fire lands. Ada gathers willow and feverfew, refusing the arithmetic that leaves the weak behind. Cuthred sketches sluices, each line a wager. He can hear his abbot's voice condemning this pragmatism, and loves his people more for it. Wolfwyn finds a hidden padlock where Osric swears none exists and pretends not to see. Yet. Mother Hild ties charms to the children's wrists, not for saints but for memory. In the hush between chores, everyone listens for oars. When the wind shifts, the sea answers with a hollow drum. It might be thunder, or it might be the future walking toward them in wet boots. The village learns new verbs. Smoke, salt, hide, Fish hung on ash poles silver the air with a clean sting that almost feels like victory. Edric divides the hours into watches and the watches into footsteps. He can hear the rhythm of panic before it arrives, and beats it back with drills. Ada walks the marsh edge, reading tracks as if the fen kept a ledger of debts not yet collected. Cuthred pores over his notes, and finds a pattern where the creek pinches the causeway. Water, the one ally that cannot be bribed. Wolfwind slips like a reed shadow, discovering that the path to secrets is to be smaller than suspicion. Osric spreads talk the way mill dust clings to boots, harmless looking until you taste grit on your tongue. Inga's warnings gather like weather beyond the headland. Between tides, hope feels mechanical. Turn the wheel, breathe, repeat. A truce stitched from thin thread is still a stitch. Ida meets Inga where the creek loosens into brackish mirrors. They trade words as if they were smuggling breath. The Jarl's numbers drift like fog. Enough to break a door, not enough to hold a county. Inga names the hunger behind the raid. Not grain, but hands to row and mend. To die when pointed. She does not apologize for telling the truth. She simply sets it down between them like a knife, handle out. Ida calculates a cheaper currency. Time. Delay the landing, lengthen the march, let the marsh tax every boot. Edric will hate it, which means it will work if he does not break it by force. They part with a nod that isn't peace but recognizes the work of staying human in weather that sandpapers the soul. Above them, a curlew draws a question mark and flies on. The plan grows ribs. Cuthred marks a moonlit corridor through the marsh where carts can float rather than sink if the timing is right, and the children can pass like whispers. Edric assigns pairs who do not quarrel to carry baskets of words, manuscripts that weigh more than iron when the soul is hungry. Ida packs tinctures that smell of bark and patience. Wolfwind maps by memory. The dead ground where mist behaves like a wall, her small voice steady, while older throats hesitate. Osric offers a mule and a grin that arrives before his eyes. No one asks the price, which is how the price grows teeth. Inga sketches the Jarl scouts in the wet mud with a dagger tip, and then blurs them with her palm, as if erasing could make it so. When night falls, the fen lifts its skirts of fog and waits to see who will trip. The crossing begins like a prayer spoken under one's breath. All consonants and fear. The marsh accepts the first steps, and then remembers it is marsh. Wheels complain. Ropes bite palms. Children are taught the game of silence. Cuthred walks backwards sometimes to watch the words he carries, as if pages might leap for freedom. Ida keeps pace with fevers, counting heartbeats the way soldiers count arrows. Edric moves at the edges, a dark punctuation, redirecting weight before the surface decides to swallow. Wolfwind's memory proves true, her finger pointing into fog where a gleam of water saves 3 men from vanishing. Osric sweats and smiles and curses in equal measure, which is to say he shows himself. Inga circles like a wary gull, listening for the oar sound that would mean the truce has ended. When the far bank materializes, it feels earned rather than found. Safety has a short half-life. By dawn, the carts are hidden beneath thorn and canvas, and the children sleep like stones that remember riverbeds. Then the cough returns to the chapel shell with a wet insistence, and fear shifts shape. Ida's willow brew takes hold, but the fever's shadow clings, demanding food more than prayers. Cuthred, ashamed of the thought, counts loaves against letters and finds no righteous sum. Edric proposes a levy on every household. Osric volunteers to oversee it with the zeal of a man who has already overseen more than anyone knew. Wolfwind's fingers discover scratches on the mill door that speak in the language of keys. Inga watches the horizon and names the wind by its temperature and the news in its teeth. The village meets at dusk to decide which sin they can afford. Tribute, theft, or hope, and everyone is poorer when they stand. It takes only a rumor to become a gallows. By noon, the green is a ring of eyes and splinters. By sundown, the word witch has learned everyone's name. Osric speaks softly, the way a knife rides in wool, telling of herbs and whispers, and how the fever walked where Ida walked. Edric's jaw works like a grindstone. He knows the village wants a throat to grip, and the raiders have not yet offered theirs. Cuthred steps forward with a voice that shakes but does not break, saying ordeal if there must be judgment, and a murmur approves, because fate is easier to absolve than neighbors. Ada listens to the wind moving through the wattle as if it had counsel. All it offers is weather. Wolfwind's gaze sticks to the miller's pocket that clinks wrong when he turns. The marsh watches close his breath and keeps its secrets for an hour longer. Morning brings the river to witness. The trial is a promise to let water choose, but water chooses no one. It reflects until people drown themselves in it. Ada is bound with wet cord so that knots will swell like the crowd's resolve. Edric says the old words with the exactness of a man who hates them, and his voice carries to the reeds, where birds stop arguing. Cuthred unfolds a scrap of a charter saved from a burnt abbey, ink like bruises, declaring that healers in time of pest are under church protection. The words are thin rope across a chasm, yet the village tests them and finds they do not break. Osric laughs without sound, already shaping a new accusation. Wolfwind memorizes the charter's seal, the way truth wears a face. Ada breathes through her wrists and counts heartbeats, saving fury for work that will feed someone. The charter holds, but only just. Mercy is granted with a blade's width. Osric retreats to his ledgers like a fox to brambles, and the village exhales in pieces that don't fit back together. Edric and Ada meet by the causeway where the wind files everything down to bone. He argues for tribute from the hidden grain he pretends not to know exists. She refuses to buy tomorrow with children. Their words strike sparks that die on wet boards. Cuthred brings numbers that feel like prayer beads. Loaves, days, doses, tides. Inga steps from the reeds and says the Jarl does not want wheat so much as bodies with shadows that can be counted at roll call and graves that do not need names. The statement rearranges the day. Wolfwind studies Edric's face and learns the shape of a man who would trade his own sleep for others' waking. Truth costs more than it pays at first. Word of the Jarl's hunger for hands shakes the village into a new arithmetic, where every child becomes a number you cannot say aloud. The council fractures. Some want to buy time with grain, others to drown raiders in channels like rats. Ida argues for both. Bread for mouths here, water as a weapon there, because survival is not a virtue. It's a list. Edric hears only the risk of trying to hold two knives at once. Cuthred proposes a night convoy to move the youngest, and the words to the island drear. Then rumor. Inga draws paths with her finger on the mud and names tides like kin. Osric claps agreement and hides the bruise of losing the trial behind teeth. Wolfwind slips from the circle as shadows lengthen, a coin of intent bright in her pocket that no one has given her. Night peels the village down to intent. Wolfwind's small hands learn the grammar of locks by listening. The mill door sighs like a tired liar. Inside, sacks breathe their warm, dusty breath, more than the public tally by a woundful. She moves like a question mark, answers piling at her feet, and then she becomes the answer. Keys pocketed, bolts drawn, the hoard redistributed by pairs who do not speak names. Ada wakes to the sound of grain passing hand to hand, a river of mercy in burlap. Cuthred counts loaves into baskets the way he once counted psalms. Edric intercepts a whisper of flight and posts a shadow where Osric planned the gate. Inga watches the lanes with a bow that stays unstrung and ready all at once. By dawn, the village is lighter and more dangerous. Fed, and therefore unwilling to kneel. At low tide, the marsh loosens its jaw, and the village moves like thieves of water. Cuthred's chalk lines become shovels, then trenches, then a thin persuasion carved through peat. Ada keeps the pace with boiled leather on palms, measuring the world in bucketfuls and breaths. Edric sets a rota, turning bodies into a machine that does not argue with mud. Wolfwyn runs messages along plank paths, her feet memorizing distances the way hands learn a face. Osric complains about erosion while quietly counting how many sacks might ride a boat if the channel holds. Inga studies the current as though it were a rival and a friend, nodding to eddies that could eat a man if asked. When the sluice finally opens, the water inhales, then rushes like a beast deciding at last to join a hunt. The sound is joy, made dangerous. Everyone smiles. No one relaxes. Relief arrives not as trumpet, but as coughs thinning, like rain easing toward mist. Ida's willow brew finds purchase. The worst fevers slope downward, and children's foreheads are cool enough to dream. Cuthred copies doses beside tides in his ledger, a private concordance of mercy. Edric allows the watch to laugh once per hour, a regulation he pretends is tactical. Wolfwyn invents a game that teaches the little ones to keep low when they hear oars, and wins by losing. Even Osric's voice sheds its burr. He speaks of ration tables as if fairness had always been his trade. Inga brings news of a patrol turned by false fires she set on a distant spit, the kind of lie that saves names from being spoken over graves. The day stretches almost warm over rush and roof. Almost. Far out, a gull kites without flapping, as if hanging from a thread. Night gives them the courage to say tender things. Edric sits beside the forge, ash, and admits he fears not death but waste, the kind that eats men a spoonful at a time. Ada confesses the name she does not speak, the child she could not keep, and how every saved breath pays down a debt that will never clear. They do not touch because the truth is already a touch. The air changes shape to hold it. Cuthred, alone in the chapel shell, writes with soot and tallow, a letter to a god he hopes still likes hard work. Wolfwyn prowls the eaves, dropping kindness into cracks. An apple left where fists clench. A joke rolled like a marble into a dark corner. Inga watches the river mouth and counts boats not yet here, choosing which bridge inside herself to burn. Osric sharpens a small knife as if preparing to cut his own shadow free. Truth arrives dressed as betrayal and stays as kin. Inga returns before dawn with a bruise of decision along her jaw, saying the Jarl smells weakness where Fenwick looks like bait. She lays out the raid pattern with the economy of someone who once stood inside it, and waits for the word that will exile her from both worlds. Ida gives it shape. Stay. Edric tests the syllable against his pride and finds it does not break. It bends like seasoned yew. Cuthred asks for names of men he might pray for while outmaneuvering, and Inga offers them without triumph. Wolfwyn watches the exchange as if learning a spell whose cost will be due later. Osric calculates what loyalty to an enemy is worth in grain, reaches a sour sum, and keeps it. Together they plant false fires along the flats, writing a sentence in light that reads, "Wrong shore, wrong hour, wrong prey." Evening lifts like a lid to show the ocean thinking. A glow licks the far coast, then another. A chain of teeth biting the horizon. The beacon is not theirs. Inga reads the distances aloud and hears her own past answering. The Jarl has quickened his pace and found another guide. Edric orders the village into shadow, then into motion, the way a heartbeat changes when it hears running. Cuthred gathers the children and the words as if the two were the same weight. To him they are. Ida checks the sick with a swiftness that wastes no tenderness. Wolfwyn climbs the palisade and counts sails with a patience that would shame saints. Osric reaches for his private path and finds a silhouette waiting where there should be no witness. The wind swings, sea-smelling and cold as new iron. Somewhere beyond the headland a horn vows itself to fire, and the fen swallows the sound. They come with the tide as promised by fear and arithmetic. First a horn unthreads the dark, then oars bite. Then the air fills with a clatter like hail that burns, arrows feathered in pitch. The palisade takes the news before anyone else does. Wood coughs sparks and begins to remember it. Was once a tree that loved light. Idris' voice cuts the panic into pieces small enough to carry. Ada moves the frail and fever-limp toward the chapel shell, where Stone still believes in holding. Cuthred folds the manuscripts into baskets, and then into arms, a liturgy of weight. Inga's eyes count not men but gaps, and she feeds those with lies. Shouts thrown where no defenders stand, a lantern hooded and unhooded to confuse. Wolfwind climbs where the smoke is thinnest and becomes a seamstress of warning. Somewhere a goat screams like a person. Somewhere a person does not make a sound. The canal is a throat waiting for the word. Cuthred takes an ember from the brazier with a hand that has only ever trembled over grammar, walks to the crate his younger self swore would outlast him, and opens it to the smell of calfskin and rain. Remember, he chooses a manuscript not by least worth, but by the shape that will carry fire best. The first lick of flame feels like a betrayal of everything he has called holy. The second, like obedience to the living. He lifts the burning page from the doorway of the chapel shell, holds it aloft on the rise above the cut, and the water answers as planned, tumbling from its hoarded height, teeth bared. Edric hears the rush and bellows for the retreat line to bend. Inga throws her voice downrange to draw the raiders onto new, slick ground. The village inhales, and breath turns to steam. The fen takes sides in the old way. It helps the patient and swallows the proud. Raiders pour across the causeway as if certainty were a bridge. Then certainty becomes a mirror, then a trap. As the first ranks slide and the second ranks step on them, Edric meets a shield wall with a rhythm that belongs to older fields and cleaner horizons, trading blows like arithmetic. Ada finds Mother Hild at the mouth of the fog where children's hands disappear and reappear through the gray. Together they stitch a path with voices. Cuthred stamps out ember trails like a pen correcting God. Inga loses arrows at ankles and oars, aiming to cripple, not decorate the dead. Wolfwind lights a string of fen fires that walk like spirits. For a heartbeat, the village stands taller than its roofs. For the next heartbeat, someone screams a name that cuts the sky in two. Loss chooses its hour with elegance. The fog deepens, the water climbs its own reflection, and the chapel path becomes the whole world. Mother Hild walks last, as she always has, naming each child with a story, as if faith were a braid of memory. When the surge finds the low place, it is not a wave so much as a hand, firm and unnegotiable. Ada reaches and catches shreds of shawl too little. Cuthred calls out a prayer he has not used in years. Edric feels the tug of choice where duty is a rope across his chest. Inga breaks formation and wades against the pull, teeth bared. The children live because someone steps where she would have stepped. The lullaby that held the line falters, and then is finished by other mouths, thinner, higher, but enough. The fog closes its palm around the sound and does not give it back. Smoke thins into a sky that remembers blue, but the village is the color of after. The raiders withdraw in knots, cursing the mud that kept their feet and the water that kept their dead. Edric finds the back gate unbarred and Osric's tracks wearing panic like perfume. He follows to the ditch where choice is an animal that jumps. Too late for justice to look clean, just in time to make sure betrayal does not open a door for others. Ada gathers the count of living and the count of names to be said over Pete. Arithmetic again, this time with ash on the slate. Cuthred sits by the black mouth of the forge and writes with soot, because ink feels too fine for the day. Inga watches the horizon as if expecting a verdict. Wolfwind curls around the ring of keys and learns that courage can tremble and still be courage. Morning arrives thin and metallic, a blade laid flat on the marsh. The raiders have drawn back to count and curse, which is the hour when plans grow legs. Edric spreads pebbles on a plank and names them after boats. His finger shows where a tide can be sharpened into a trap. Ida listens for the coughs that would veto courage and hears only breathing steady enough to gamble with. Cuthred reads the moon against the water and finds a psalm in its subtraction. Here less, there more. Then the rush. Inga, who has betrayed one banner and not yet earned another, sketches how to bite oars and leave men stranded with their pride in both hands. Wolfwyn volunteers for fire running and discovers her voice is already brave. Osric asks what becomes of the mill if the plan fails. No one answers. The fen settles, as if to watch a story it has seen before. The plan requires a conversation with distance. Wolfwyn runs the flats at graylight, setting little suns where the mud remembers to be firm. Each flame says, "Go here, not there." Inga ghosts between channels to scuff tracks and feed the raiders a trail of confidence. The deadliest ration. Cuthred stands on the abbey stump with a bellless rope and counts heartbeats to the swell. Ada moves through the huts, tying each decision to a wrist. Who waits? Who carries? Who stays loud enough to sound like many? Edric places his few fighters where the ground angles toward mercy for their feet and contempt for the enemies. Osric, given a coil of rope and a job nameable in public, nods with competence that tastes like penance. The light thins and draws a long breath over the water. Somewhere a gull laughs as if it knows the punchline will hurt. Dawn splits, and with it, the Jarl's patience. He pushes his men onto the gloss of the newly bared flats, boots thudding like drumheads over a hollow truth. The first ranks meet resistance that looks smaller than it is. Edric at the hinge of ground, a handful who know how to be more than a handful. Ada finds a child fallen waist-deep in suction and tells him a story while the mud lets go. Inga steps into the open with her bow slung and her hand empty, calling a name from the ship line with the intimacy of old orders. 3 men look her way and choose confusion, which is victory-sized today. Cuthred's voice rides the wind in measured counts. Hold, hold, now. Wolfwyn lights the last beacon and becomes flame-shaped herself. The Jarl strides through the gap toward Edric, and the air tightens as if a forge hammer had been raised. Tides are clocks that refuse to be bargained with. The return comes sooner, shouldered by a wind that did not read their figures. The flats change their mind mid-battle. Footing that was argument becomes answerless depth. Edric and the Jarl trade blows on a spit, now fretting underwater, each strike measured. Neither man willing to be legend for free. Ada judges distances the way healers do, and starts pulling fighters backward by their sleeves, turning retreat into choreography. Cuthred's counts break, reform, then accelerate into prayer. Inga sees boats at anchor yaw as the flood takes their chains taut. She moves for the knots with a grin that is not joy, but decision. Wolfwyn's fires turn to smoke signals that mean the same thing in every tongue. Now, now, now. Osric's rope work pays off in silence as skiffs swing the wrong way at exactly the right moment. The last exchange happens in a pocket of stillness that should not exist. The Jarl slips, regains purchase, and in that fraction Edric could end a line of story. He does not. Ada arrives between them with a voice that finds the bone of the day. There is a boat and a bargain, and both will drown if they wait to become pride. Inga does not lift her bow. She looks at the men she once followed and names the tide as witness. Cuthred holds up a cross made of ore fragments and hope, which is the only kind that floats. Wolfwyn stands where children can see her and stay steady. Osric stares at the open water and learns that exile can be a shape you choose before it is given. The Jarl tastes the air and chooses to live, which is a kind of courage rarely sung. The oath is spoken with salt for ink. The morning after a storm is an accountant. It moves through Fenwick with a finger of light, adding what breath remains and subtracting what does not argue. Nets hang like tired lungs. The palisade steams as if trying to forget fire. Men who almost died lift buckets as though they were confessions. Women who did not sleep pretend that they did. Edric walks the perimeter with the gait of a man counting ghosts and finding too many familiar. Ida paces the line between ash and living, binding, rinsing, telling the small lies that turn hurt into patience. Cuthred drafts oaths in soot on split boards, a covenant that tastes of wood smoke and salt. Inga scrubs her ringmail until it reflects a face she will learn to answer to. Wolfwin weeds nails from the mud with a magnet of will. The Jarl's boats rock at their moorings. Uncertain things now, like words pronounced differently. At low water, they gather where the marsh keeps its word best. On timber dark with tide marks and promises, the Jarl stands slimmer than his legend and heavier than his choices. Edric meets him in the space where men have knelt and chosen not to. Between them, Ida holds the language of hinges. If, then, and until something opens. Cuthred reads the covenant aloud, each clause a plank hammered to the next. No taking of hands, shared warning fires, grain swapped for ironwork, passage at need. Inga watches both shores, her posture saying that oaths must be guarded like doors left ajar. Wolfwin grips the rush cord that will bind wrists, her knuckles white with ceremony. Osric shifts in the crowd and learns that peace bargains also count what the greedy lose. The wind tastes of tin and thaw. When the Jarl nods, the river seems to nod with him. After oaths, reckoning. The part of survival that looks like mathematics and feels like grief's attic. Names are spoken where the peat takes them kindly. Each syllable settles like a coin on a closed lid. Cuthred writes as they speak, his hands steady the way a boat is steady when it accepts waves instead of arguing. Ada moves among the mourners and stitches the living back to themselves with cups of broth, with tasks that are smaller than sorrow, and therefore endurable. Edric stands bareheaded until the wind erases the salt from his lashes. Then he starts building. Inga contributes rope tricks from another life that keep a roof thatch fast in storm. Wolfwin chalks letters on the chapel stones and teaches them to younger mouths. A defiance quiet as lichen. Osric presents a measure of grain without a word, and the silence serves as apology better than speech. Work becomes ritual, and ritual becomes a way not to drown. The granary is rebuilt with a new rule carved into its door. Measure twice. Accuse never. Ada organizes herbs as if setting a choir in order. Willow to the left, courage to the right. Cuthred opens a school in the chapel shell where letters are shields and sums make bridges. He teaches with the patience of someone who has watched water learn to move. Edric drills a rota that belongs to everyone. The kind of watch that lets mothers sleep and fishermen dream unpunished. Inga takes boatcraft to children who will measure tides with their ankles before they can spell them, and smiles when they argue with the wind. Wolfwin illustrates maps that show not monsters, but food and shelter. Osric keeps the mill turning at a price that does not bruise. The village's pulse steadies. The fen listens, pleased. Evening comes with a hush that is not fear, but room. The Jarl's men push off on a tide that carries the oath like script across the flat water. No cheers follow, only the sound of rope leaving wood. Ada and Wolfwin walk to the reed bed where the marsh keeps the color of old pewter and young grass. They say nothing for a long while. Then everything in a few words about the names on the roll and the ones yet to be written. Edric watches their backs and lets a smile take him by surprise. Cuthred closes his ledger and places it in a clay jar. Against fire and forgetting, Inga sends a lone arrow into the sky with no target, a gesture of surrender to the wind. Osric turns the wheel until it hums exactly like obedience. Night settles and the fen replies with 1,000 small tongues. We keep. We keep.